What if every experience, every hardship, every obstacle was given to you, not to break you, but to mold you and strengthen you? What if the center of your suffering was actually the key to ultimate health? And what if your own pain was meant to be the catalyst for your greatest purpose? Welcome to Buddha Belly Life, empowering purpose, mind to microbiome. Welcome to the Buddha Belly Life podcast. Today, our guest is Patch McCormick. He is an integrative therapist who works primarily with men individually, as well as couples, families, and groups. His goal is to arm clients with the tools they need to build a healthy support system, secure relationships, and ultimately become their own therapist. And today we're going to be really digging into attachments and how they shape us and develop our relationships, which are so much of our life. So thank you for joining us today, Patch.
Yeah, my pleasure. Really appreciate you inviting me on.
Yeah, so I like to do it. So tell us, so where are you located? Because you say you cover Cali and NYC. I have coaches, if you're not familiar, I have coaches all over the place. And so where are you located and how do you toggle between those two locations?
Yeah. So I recently moved with my fiance back to New York, at Brooklyn specifically, which is where we originally met. But, prior to that, we were living in LA for about 3 years together. I was there about 5, and that's where I did where I did my master's and training. So I'm licensed now in California and New York, both of those states. And all of my practice, 100% of it, is virtual at the moment. So I see... I still have majority of my clients are in California. And then, I've got a couple New York clients, but I just got licensed here. So
it's expanding. Very cool. So
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, before we get into your expertise here, tell me a little bit about your story, because I know in being a coach, working with coaches, I always say, like, those of us that are in any kind of coaching, therapeutic, or any caretaking, like give me all the nurses and everything, we all usually have a story. We usually didn't get here because it was lucrative. So what's your background? What got you into this line of work, and specifically kind of these focuses?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I mean, there is always, I think in the therapy world, like that is a little, it's usually less front and center, but that's changing, I would say. I worked in advertising for around almost a decade prior to becoming a therapist. But I had wanted to be a therapist since I was, in I think sophomore year of high school. Sophomore year of high school, I took a psychology class and I was just like rapt. And, it explained just a lot of what I saw in my family dynamics most people dissuaded me, right? They're like, you don't want to be a therapist. You can be a therapist in any job, right? Which is not entirely untrue, because I played a lot of that role in advertising as an account director and then a managing director. There's a lot of, as you talked about earlier, active listening and validation and, conflict mediation and making multiple people feel heard and seen at once. But anyways, I was largely dissuaded. And I followed a more masculine path because that was what, family, society, folks were just kind of pushing me towards. So, and ironically, when I went into advertising, Mad Men was like all the rage, right? Which, you could see themes of masculinity and hyper-masculinity in that show. But yeah, I mean, I loved advertising. I was, I was pretty good at it if I fit in that environment, but I really didn't like who it was turning me into, because, like the work environment in advertising is much like finance or in, it's just like workaholism, all the aholisms essentially. And, hyper competitive. And in order to really succeed, you kind of have to morph into this, what I would call like a hyper competitive, hyper masculine energy, right? And I would say for me, I was finding myself deprioritizing relationships and prioritizing work and performance, and I was pretty unhappy. So I went to therapy myself after a really bad breakup, like a couple years in advertising, and started my kind of self-discovery journey. And learned a lot about the influences of hypermasculinity in my life, and how that had me really prioritizing everything but relationships, and got back in touch with kind of who I was before all the conditioning got to me, which was, I was a sensitive kid, and I was creative and very empathic and felt everything around me a ton. And I just learned to numb that. But through therapy, I kind of found my way back to who I was before all of that. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to make this jump. And I made it. And, it wasn't without doubt along the way. Like I certainly doubted myself and my decision plenty. But today I'm super stoked. I'm just so happy that I made that jump, because everything has kind of aligned. My personal and professional life are like very integrated and symbiotic, and it feels good. Really good.
Congruent. Your life
congruent.
More
Yeah,
congruent.
Exactly.
Yeah,
congruence. Very good. Yeah.
And it can still be compartmentalized, right? Like
For sure.
I'm a single mom. I have 3 kids. Like my mom time is where it is, and then my business time, my work time, and the people I'm with is very compartmentalized, but I am congruent. So when I'm at work or I'm in business and I get, some coach that's stuck on performance or whatever, and they're going, kill it, what are you going to sacrifice? I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not trading my deathbed regrets for anything you got. I will manage money and I will bust my ass in these hours, but I'm strong with that because I'm congruent. And but you have to, I think you have to find that piece of yourself to solidify really hard in your values. And if you're that person, like you said, where you form yourself and maybe you weren't really supported, and maybe like your individualism and maximizing your individual potential and who you were created and your personality type.
Totally.
Then you're stuck trying to like mirror other people or match outside like feedback to be that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you. And so when you got into this world, so can you define first, okay, I think it's really important we touch on the subject of hypermasculinity, because I think a lot of people, yes, we're going to have a big audience of women, but we're really talking to men here.
Oh, great.
And we need more men to talk to men, because unfortunately women they do this all the time. They try and talk for men or send it to men, and it's just not, it's counterintuitive. But I think when men hear, especially men hear hypermasculinity, or we're trying to move away from hypermasculinity, they fall into their perception that we're trying to feminize men. And I know that's not true. Can you dig into that just a little bit and clarify?
Yeah, of course. So just a lot of important points you made. And I'm glad you asked for that clarification. So hypermasculinity is kind of like a value set that I would say, based on my research and my own personal experience, I think a lot of men would resonate with this, is like, it is communicated through books, TV, mythology, movies, political figures, pop culture, the playground, your family, from a very young age. So it's kind of like the definition of what it means to be a real man. And
an avatar that everyone must meet.
Exactly. Yeah. Great analogy. And, some of those value sets are like, emotional stoicism, i.e. men don't have emotions, real men don't have emotions, right? Mm-hmm. So, and some stoicism's okay, but I'm talking about hyper stoicism.
I totally understand. Yeah.
Hyper stoicism.
Yeah.
Hyper competition, right? If you're not a winner, you're a loser, right? So like just competing with everyone. Domination, same idea. Let me just actually pull up some of these. Hyper autonomy. So like the idea of, depending on others is weak. Real men are able to do like everything on their own. Asking for help is weak. So like, it's kind of like if you look at some of the most popular, male figures in mythology and movies, like James Bond is one that comes really to mind, right? He's always on the run, always on to his next thing. A lot of being desired, exactly. A lot of Hemingway's characters, and even Ernest Hemingway, same idea. Anyway, so that's kind of another element there. It's an obsession with performance and hyper focus on work above relationships. And let me just pull some other ones just because I've got them actually very recent. Go ahead.
And to elaborate a little too, I think it's a lack of encouraging authenticity of self and cultivating. Like we cultivate our real self. So if we're just only cultivating against an avatar, then we're discouraging our boys to really become their own man and masculine man in all their own senses with their own gifts that don't look just like this person or that person. We're really narrowing the box of who they get to be, and we're holding them back from kind of flourishing in who their strengths and their personality type and their confidence, essentially, at the end of the day.
Do you have a desire for fulfillment? Does helping people tap into their own health mentally, emotionally, and physically fire you up? Do you believe in the impact of the gut microbiome on overall wellness? You may be an HWCA coach. For more info on our cutting-edge health coach trainings, visit hwcacoach.com.
Yeah, precisely. So like this, what you talk about, this box, this kind of man box, as some people refer to it, if there's this constant comparison, if I am not this, then I'm not enough, or I'm not a man, it's just inherent to it is shame, right?
I was going to say shame.
Exactly. Is, you're constantly going to run up against this like greater than, less than binary that creates shame, right? And it's not only do like some men shame other men if they're not quote unquote man enough, but men shame themselves, right? Yeah. They shame any part of themselves that feels different than that box. And exactly as you said, it might have them choosing professions that are not actually aligned with who they are at the root, and leading to lack of fulfillment, misaligned purpose, right? It can have them being attracted to and choosing specific partners that are not aligned with who they are internally, but fit kind of this man box. So it's not the best compass. It's not the most authentic compass. It's a kind of prescribed, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not, and there's I think that just to have two polar opposites of anything is really unhealthy. Like we just say feminine, masculine. Like, no, just because you're not trying to be overtly masculine or inauthentic or match somebody else's perceived masculinity does not make you not masculine. It doesn't make you feminine. You know what I mean? It's a different type of I don't know, cool factor. There's some people that can just be more chill, and you can see and appreciate that, and you attract more of those things. So if like we're more, you'll see that. I feel like, and correct me if you disagree, but I feel like you'll see the more grandiose personalities or people who really do think that all their identity is big and boisterous. They'll go for people who. They'll attract people who are into that, but who are also value those kinds of things instead of maybe someone that like you can connect with on a deeper, more secure level and actually flourish more with somebody like that, that doesn't hit your insecurity every other day because, you're probably both doing that.
Man, you hit the nail on the head, right? Like attracts like, and, unfortunately I think it's very popular, you are who you surround yourself with, or you are the 5 people you spend the most time with. Your nervous system is the nervous system you spend the people, with the 5 people you spend your most time with. Your wealth is, equivalent to the 5 people or the average of the 5 people you spend your most time with. So if all of your friends ascribe to this grandiose or, hyper masculine values, you're going to be like them, 1, right? But 2, your relationships are only going to be skin deep, right? Because it's a very fragile game. If you're not performing at that level of, grandiosity, for example, you're out, right? It leaves no room for error and also no room for depth of connection. Anyways, yeah.
And self-compassion too. Like when you're somewhere safe, like when you're with people that accept you for who you are, it doesn't mean you're just an ass whenever you feel like it. It just means that you're like, okay, if I screw up, if I don't perform great today, if I'm not my best self, these are people, I'm workable just as anyone around me is workable. It's like, I'm not going to lose love or acceptance or community because I make a mistake or because I let my mask down, doesn't come with that.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned a really important piece, which is self-compassion, which, I find, and this is myself included, right? Which is like, well, if I stop whipping myself, right? There is no way that I'm going to perform at the level that I used to, right? And, and a lot of my male clients, a lot of clients, period, believe that. And the reality is that in the short term, criticism and harshness may get you the results that you want. But in the long term, studies indicate that it's not sustainable, right? You are going to burn out, you are going to crash, and and your health is going to take a real hit, not to mention your relationships. So just kind of underlining this piece that like self-compassion or, is kind of the more sustainable tool in order to ensure long-term happiness and long-term performance.
Yeah. And then I feel like you see a pattern of the criticism thing, like, especially with men. I always laugh because I see these gurus, like I see these like influencers and stuff for big business people, and they'll be up there swearing and just like emasculating every man. Yeah. And these dudes will be sharing it like, yeah, I'm so pumped today. And I'm like, this would never work with women. If you got up there and called us fat and lazy and stuff, like your following would not be growing right now. But I feel like that it's like this masochistic motivation, right?
For sure.
But at the end of the day, those people, I feel like they might be motivated through that, but try any level of criticism in an intimate relationship, and it will not be received well. Even if it's constructive and healthy, I feel like it's absolutely rejected. And that just seems completely opposite.
Totally. I mean, I think, yeah, I'm thinking of like, what is his name? Henry Goggins or the Stay
David
Hard
Goggins.
guy.
Oh,
Yeah, Dave Goggins.
yes.
Yeah. Or like Andy Frisella, he has a 75 hard thing.
Right.
There's a lot of these figures, and some of them are like, they have the best intentions and like they really do want to see people win.
Right.
And at the same time, I would say that, the vast majority that follow that experience so much shame on a day-to-day basis. I kind of want to like stress that, it's okay to get pumped up and feel motivated and, go after big, hairy, audacious goals and, experience the fun of testosterone and dopamine and winning, right? It just can't be your whole personality in every arena of your life, because what that also creates is a bunch of people feeling like they're losing around you. And let me be clear about that. I'm not saying diminish your light, so to speak. Not at all. I'm just saying, with that attitude of like, if you're not a winner, you're a loser,
You're not lifting people up.
that leaks out onto everyone in your surrounding, and you start to view them, if they're not performing, with contempt, i.e., I'm better than you, right? And that is the most toxic thing for relationships that exists. It's contempt, right?
Right.
It's the number one predictor of divorce. So, yes, in a business setting, this might get you, or a war setting, right? Or
A war. If you need to fight for your life.
or a sports setting, this might get you good short-term results. But like, what are the coaches that you absolutely adored, right? What are the, the leaders that you absolutely adored? Well, they're the folks that can mix the two, right? And they're not shaming. They're not shaming.
Right.
They're passionate, they're strong,
They'll hold you accountable.
They're firm, they hold you accountable, but they never shame. There's just like no place for that in a healthy life. Period.
Yeah.
We've got enough of it.
Oh yeah. And that's like all the work Brene Brown did, was like all this stuff comes back to shame, and especially for men, but even for women. And so a lot of these, it leads to just dysfunction in our relationships and ultimately lack of satisfaction in our own lives.
For sure.
So like you said, it bleeds onto people around you. So the childhood piece of that. All right. So a child's need, and I think that when we differentiate boy from girl, right? We forget that all children, especially 0 to 7, need a lot of the same very similar developmental things at that stage. They're just little sponges that need love and safety and all these things.
Yeah.
And what's happening now can you talk a little bit about the attachment years piece? I've been digging into this a lot lately. It's fascinating. It's helping me do a lot of healing work, but dig in a little bit to some of that piece, because we're going to talk about how it affects relationships.
Totally. So, do you want me to describe attachment theory and stuff like that?
Yeah, maybe just like like a simple, like an overview of it.
Yeah, so essentially, attachment theory developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. It's been replicated and validated across cultures, so it's worldwide. It's the most widely held and respected theory of human development in the world of psychology today, by far. And it essentially talks about how we form relationships, how we learn to form relationships. And this is done primarily in the first 3 years of life, but can be molded and impacted by relational trauma, i.e. divorce or moving away, things like that, losing a job. But attachment theory talks about 4 different attachment styles. And I use the kind of more pop culture words for them because they're easier to understand. So one is avoidant attachment. Another is anxious attachment. Another is disorganized attachment. And the last is secure attachment. So secure attachment is around 50% of the population. Those the last numbers that I've seen. I think the pandemic changed that. Avoidant attachment is around 25%, anxious is around 20%, and then disorganized is 5%. These are the last numbers. Anxious attachment is kind of defined by driven by an underlying wound of fear of abandonment. And so this style tends to seek co-regulation, i.e. they seek other people in order to feel safe, right? Avoidant attachment is the opposite. Their underlying fear is rejection, and also loss of autonomy, but they tended to grow up in neglectful home environments. So they learned that they could never count on anyone. And so they learn to auto-regulate, meaning they only depend on themselves for safety. They actually view relationships as threatening because, they let them down. Disorganized attachment is more, is a combination of anxious and avoidant. It's a kind of like, I love you, I hate you, right? It's someone who actually typically experienced chronic traumatic environments, scary, like very scary upbringing. And so they don't really know what feels safe. And so then, the last one would be secure. And secure is like, these folks have really no trouble attaching to people, although they can very much attune to their emotions and other people's emotions. They have healthy boundaries. They tend to couple up very quickly, like in their 20s. So what's left on the attachment market...
The rest of us are left.
Yeah, what's left on the attachment market is typically avoidant, anxious, and disorganized. And you can have a certain amount of secure still in that mix, but you tend to lean one way or the other. And the most common pairing is anxious avoidant because they're kind of like magnets, right?
I feel like when you described anxious and avoidant, it felt bass-backwards to me. It makes sense because like for instance, I've always been a kind of person who I am more independent. I do feel safer on my own.
Yeah.
But I'm an addresser of things.
Yeah.
I seek like, hey, and I check in a lot. I'm very intuitive to my environment and I check in like, how are you feeling? I know you said you're okay, but you don't seem like you are.
Yeah.
Or I'm upset. This is why. And whereas I see avoidant as being people that avoid the conflict or bringing up the thing. Would that be like a combination, or is that just like a thing I'm not? And then I know people that were the opposite of that. They do need other people all the time, to self-regulate.
Yeah.
But they avoid the conflict. So do you have any insight? Am I just throwing you all around here on this?
No, I think you bring up a really important point, which is that no one fits these to a T, right? There are lots of exceptions and different ways of coping, right? So like the way that I like to talk about it is folks tend to lean one direction, but they can have traits of another, right?
So what's a stronger predictor, do you think, though? How we handle conflict or how we view safety or our root fears of relationship? What do you think is a stronger kind of indicator of our attachment style? Is there an answer to that?
I think the easiest answer is, and I don't actually see those two as different, right? Mm-hmm. Conflict and safety for me are kind of like, how does your nervous system deal with threat, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Do you deal with threat by kind of attacking it and, engaging it and pursuing it? Or do you deal with threat by distancing and going away from it, right? I.e. auto-regulation versus co-regulation, right?
So that could be like, I'm just trying to make it personal so I can understand it.
Of course, yeah.
So for me, I do address conflict, right? Mm-hmm. But if there's something that feels threatening to me, I don't run to it. I close off. I push back. Yeah. I'd probably be more of an avoidant. You may necessarily too attached.
You may lean avoidant. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And here is a tricky part, right? One, I would have to do a full attachment questionnaire with you, right? Mm-hmm. In order to actually fully diagnose. And even then I probably wouldn't diagnose right away. I would want to work with you over, a couple of months, because this relationship, meaning you and I, if you were my client, I would learn a lot about your attachment style, right? Mm-hmm. Just from us,
Right.
So I don't want to it's easy for us humans to want to categorize ourselves, right?
Right.
Whether it's in the man box or the attachment box or or the introvert box, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is that it's usually a lot more nuanced. I, for one, will disclose that it was hard for me to actually truly see my attachment style. I didn't fully see it for 7 years after actually being in therapy, studying it. I did not want to accept that I was avoidant. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And that's because there's a lot of stigma around avoidant attachment, and there were certain traits that didn't really fit it, right? Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'll just say one more point, which is the confusing part is that you can have a certain attachment adaptation in the home, right? Mm-hmm. I.e., you do fear abandonment, right? What have you. And then you may learn societally, for example, if you're a man, that that style of fearing abandonment and pursuing relationships and appearing quote unquote needy is not attractive to women and is not manly, for example. And you can begin to shape yourself to a cultural narrative, and if you work hard enough at it, you can certainly change your attachment style to be avoidant, right? Mm-hmm. And I think,
but neither are getting to the root of any issue. You're just it's like a practice. You're just forcing a different behavior.
Precisely. I mean, you can force your behavior in a healthy direction, or you can force your behavior in an unhealthy direction, Yeah.
And so that's great information. And that's so much, obviously that's just like a Pandora's box. And a big part of all these things is I think really to empower, encourage people to dig in, because I think it's funny because I'm just different. It's interesting to me that a lot of people avoid the introspection and self-awareness because I think they experience lots of shame feelings. There's a fear. Sure. Yeah, there's a fear of the shame or the things. Whereas for what I've experienced in my life, it's freedom. So I have like
Yeah.
a polar opposite.
Yeah.
So I'll make someone super uncomfortable in a relationship because I'm like, we're growing or we're dying, like, or like I'm growing or dying, like you coming or you're not, because
Totally.
because a worse thing to me is for something to go unchecked in me and become me. You know what I mean? If I don't check it and I carry it with me continuously and it's a constant behavior or action or a thing, then that can become me. And I can't handle how that feels looking in the mirror. So I would rather go, ooh, there's that ugly thing. Let me go get it. And I may be a little hyper vigilant with that because of how life's made me in that way. But for most people, I do think that they're more like, oh, let's just, put it under the rug. Let's just kind of not, do that. But ultimately, like, there is freedom. I think there's a lot of freedom in digging in. It's less about being accountable to the outside world and more on being free ourselves, don't you think?
Oh, I mean, I think that absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. I agree with you. I would say that's the exception, not the rule. Meaning, like,
Right.
It's more rare for people to view this stuff in that way, and that's just because it's like not like historically, like it's just not really incentivized in pop culture. Like the truth is not popular. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? Because the truth is usually not black and white. It's nuanced and it's tough. I will say, just to kind of underline what you were saying, defensiveness or avoidance, or i.e. not looking at one's shit, right? Is understandable because it's scary, but it's also running, right? It's hiding. So it's not great for your nervous system. You're going to feel threatened if you're constantly avoiding and defending. And the long-term solution to defensiveness is responsibility, is owning it, right? And that's where I think you get the freedom. That's where I think you get
the power.
The power is you're like, oh no, this is mine, and I can actually work on it and change it. But that shift it takes some work for people to get there. And it could be, 3 different coaches or 3 different therapists, and then
Or multiple failed relationships.
usually that's the
it's
kicker.
The pain
Yeah.
we don't want to keep experiencing, whether it be relationships, our childhood.
Yeah, that's honestly, like, I think there's no better teacher than looking at your relationship patterns, right?
Yeah.
You can deny one relationship as being like, but if you're like 1, 2, 3 jackpot, right?
Yeah.
Which for me was necessary for seeing my avoidance, right? Then, that's usually kind of the most compelling argument you can make to someone. And then if you can travel it back in the family lineage, then you're like,
Right.
come on,
And I like that you brought that up because then we go back. So it's one thing to, and I think this is where the self-compassion comes in, is when we study the early life attachment, trauma experiences and stuff like that, because okay, right now I'm digging myself apart as an adult, and maybe we're digging ourselves apart because we've had a failed relationship, which is going to be very common.
Yeah.
Or things that are happening now in the adult life. But if we can acknowledge that, and then, like you said, go back to where it started, then we have compassion for ourselves, because we're like, okay, we were set up for this. Now, am I going to,
Totally.
and that wasn't our fault. Am I
course
going
not.
to take the time? Am I going to take now my power? Am I going to change my life? Am I going to reparent myself and re-experience so I can have a good life? Because I can choose to do that. So how does that early time really affect these attachment styles? Are there patterns we see that you see in early life and attachment styles and experiences?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, the general gist is, and I'm generalizing, right?
Right.
But avoidant attachment is typically created, I would say, most often through neglect, whether that's, physical or emotional. And I would say in like, more affluent, Caucasian folks, it's the emotional neglect, right? It's like devaluing emotions. But also abuse and enmeshment can create this avoidance, like, oh, it's not safe to be close to this. I'm going to go to my room. I'm going to run away from this. Like, it's very scary. So those, avoidance is largely created mostly from neglect, but also abuse and enmeshment. Anxious attachment is typically created from, just unpredictable behavior. So, say, for example, your parents are, they work a lot and you're raised by multiple different nannies, right? Your whole life. And this is just one example. But when your parents are home, they're like wonderful, right? Or it's like really fun and they're there, but then they go, right? There's this like constant coming and going. That creates a really unpredictable environment for a kid. And there's this fear of abandonment, right? That can also be caused by, of course, a parent dying or a parent leaving, right?
Mental health issues.
Mental health issues, exactly.
Mood fluctuations are dramatic.
Yeah. Addiction is a big one, right? Again, disorganized attachment. I think the primary marker is like how scary was the home environment.
Yeah.
But also consistent harm from the person who is supposed to be safe, right?
Right.
That creates a real aversion to love. What is love? Is love abuse? Sometimes this person is abusive, sometimes they're loving, but like in general, it's kind of scary. That creates more disorganization. Does that make sense?
Oh, tons.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so why then or how?
Oh, and then secure attachment.
Yeah.
I
don't buy the 50%. Not even a little.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I'm the leftovers.
no one buys it. And usually, I would say it's kind of like the more insecurely attached folks. But I feel you. I don't fully buy it either, but that's because my world is dealing in the insecure, right? Yeah. I'm a therapist.
Right.
So I don't know it, right? But
what they had growing up.
Oh, what they had growing up is in there's a really good book on this. It's called The Power of Attachment. It has a really great it's very non-pathologizing, really great outline of each attachment style, but also a big portion on secure functioning, like what creates secure attachment. And the number one thing, or in one word, secure attachment is attunement. Yes. Right? Attunement. So I had caregivers who attuned to me, right? They knew and could mirror what I was experiencing and validate that experience. And they were also attuned to their own experience. So they're projecting less onto their kids. They are, self-regulating their emotional states. There's very little codependency, right? It's just safe. No?
They're healthy co-regulators. So kids are learning
Bingo.
How to manage emotions when they're not at an age where it works very good.
Exactly. I actually want to see if I've got the book over here. Yeah, I do. I can read you some more of these traits if you want.
Go for it. Yeah, no, that's great. Everybody's like, okay, get my checklist out.
Well, I mean, I'm saying this because these secure attachment like principles apply to every insecure attachment. Like it's a path to become secure.
Healing.
Yeah. So active listening is one secure attachment principle. Presence. Learning to be present. Attunement. This is what I was just talking about, right? Let's see. Engage in joint attention, i.e. like collaboration, getting something done with someone together, right? Rather than separately. Mindfulness of comings and goings. This is a big one that I use with my couples, but because it's so big. But that is like, for anxiously attached folks, they're going to be really sensitive to people leaving, right? For work, for a trip, getting off the phone, right? So minding that and being very sensitive to that is really important for an anxiously attached person's nervous system. Contrastingly, for an avoidant person, coming back together, reconvening is really hard because they've been in their zone, their auto-regulation zone. So coming back together is like, I'm losing my autonomy again. This person's smothering me. They're not allowing me to have my space. And that requires some sensitivity and a buffer. So there are some activities that you can do to really help each person's nervous system in there. And that's all about co-regulation. Eye gazing, i.e. like keeping eye contact and...
That was very hard for me.
Yeah, it's really tough. Okay, well... Oh, I lost you.
Oh, there you are. You're good.
Oh, no.
I can hear you. If you can't hear me, I can hear you.
Oh, you're back.
Yeah.
Okay. So, eye contact... Difficulty with eye contact is usually a sign of avoidance, FYI. Doesn't mean you strictly have avoidant attachment. It's just it is an avoidant characteristic.
Can you be both, like an anxious avoidant?
Yeah,
I feel like that definitely sounds like me when you couple a few of these things together.
Yeah, absolutely. You can be anxious avoidant, and actually, I think. And this is my pet theory. I have not validated this at all. But I have validated elements of it, which is I think we are all insecure attachers are disorganized. And they just lean one way or the other, right? And the reason I say that is because on the road to secure attachment, i.e. in becoming secure, each sign becomes more like the other. So like if you're anxious, actually what you need in order to develop more security is actually some more avoidance. And I'm not talking like in a pathological way, but
you practice.
Exactly. And that does emerge on the road to security. Vice versa, avoidant person needs to actually become more okay with seeking and co-regulation, etc. Anyways.
And is that so?
That was a tangent.
No, it's great. That's right on line. So how is it that we couple up so often with these disorganized attachments? And no wonder, I guess, we have so much struggle in relationships, and not even the divorce rate. There's plenty of people who are still married that I would say don't necessarily have what I would want for a marriage, right? Sure. Or for a relationship. Sure. So it's not even just about the divorce rate. It's about the healthy mutual fulfillment and growing togetherness of our culture. It's so how do these play poorly off of each other instead of positively?
Yeah. So I think it's a mindset, right? And it's a great question. I'm glad you kind of because we're kind of getting close to wrapping here. But it's a mindset. People, when they see that, okay, my style is completely different than this person's style, and they don't even know, and they may not even know what their attachments are, but they see this person's a pursuer and I'm a distancer, and we're incompatible. That's what people think, right? Not true. That's a hard no for me. That's not incompatibility. I've made it work myself, right? But there's there are a few quotes and expressions that signal kind of the answer to this. And those are, we marry our unfinished business, right?
Yep.
I.e., we marry someone that has everything that's going to trigger us and is kind of forcing us to confront that which we need to heal. Another expression that's similar is, I forget exactly how it goes, but essentially we seek out and marry the person that has everything we need to develop in maturation, essentially. Like, it's kind of like what I was saying previously, that an anxiously attached person has some of what an avoidantly attached person needs to develop to the next stage of maturation.
Right.
And vice versa. The avoidant person has what the anxiously attached person needs to develop to the next stage of maturation. So we're seeking maturity, but we're seeing it as pathology, essentially. Incompatibility. Precisely.
And probably because you're missing two components, which is one, the self-awareness to say,
totally,
hey, this is how I am. I need to grow.
Yep.
And different isn't bad.
Yep.
And then that commitment to doing that with somebody, and I would say then creating safe space for each other. Because I like when you said what a person would need, what an anxious person needs is they need to feel like this. Whereas usually when someone's acting out in that way, when they're anxious about you leaving for a trip or something, right? Then they're shamed. Like there's something wrong with you. Bingo. Or you don't trust me or whatever. And that further exacerbates the root issue. Or if someone comes home and they're all out there and they can't wind back down, there's just conflict that isn't noticed instead of resolved, and healing space is created and going, hey, I want to understand you.
Well, and there's
shame with you.
Exactly. And there's shame there too, right? It's like, what's wrong with you? You don't want to see me? Like, God, you suck at relationships, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then, avoidance feel a ton of shame. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. It is the safety that's created by shared vulnerability, right? Mm-hmm. By shared humility. I am flawed, right? Or I have, I'm imperfect. Flawed, I don't really like that word. Mm-hmm. I'm imperfect, and I want to grow. That requires humility.
Mm-hmm. And which doesn't mean you're going to be a totally different person. It means you're just going to cultivate that which you are in a healthier way.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, and support somebody in the process. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of folks that I think it's completely normal and okay for an insecure attacher to maintain some of those traits for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. Yep. Our goal is just to get better, right? Become more relational. But if, an avoidant...
To function with them, not necessarily to make them all go away, but to function with another person.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. Precisely.
Yeah, that's amazing.
View it all with compassion. Yeah.
Yeah. This is great information. So, again, be careful for all the women that just want to go send this to your husband, because if it comes from you might have to verbalize it in a special way, because it's just hard to do that. But where can people find you, Patch? Like, where can they find more of your teaching, follow your stuff, connect with you, especially if they're in your areas for actual one-on-one therapy?
For sure. Yeah. So I'm on Instagram and Threads. Threads I've been loving recently. And at Talk to Patch. So,
and I'll put the links in the bio for the podcast too, but just Talk to Patch if on Instagram, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Yeah, I feel like I wasn't super articulate in the beginning there around hypermasculinity. I'm much more articulate on paper. And so there's plenty of stuff on my pages that you can kind of read about. And I learned it from other people like Bell Hooks and Terry Real and other pioneers. But I really appreciate you having me on. And, you know, I'm always open for questions and concerns, pushback from you or your audience anytime.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Patch. This has been amazing. Everyone's going to get so much benefit out of this. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for another empowering episode of Buddha Belly Life. For more information on gut health and mindset resources, visit buddhabellylife.com. And remember, heal yourself and then empower others to do the same.